Try that again. Hello, thank you for joining AcademiaSG's second pre-GE webinar. AcademiaSG was founded in 2019 as an independent and non-partisan volunteer collective of Singaporean academics, comprising Linda Lim of the University of Michigan, Teo Yu Yen at NTU, Chong Jia Yen of NUS, and me, Cherian George at Hong Kong Baptist University. Joanne Liao at Simon Fraser University is our associate editor. We believe academics can and should contribute to important public debates. Our regular outreach includes a monthly email newsletter and events like this one. We sometimes hear that we Singaporeans should mind our own business. But we agree 100%, and we believe that the politics and public affairs of our country is the business of every Singaporean. It's in that spirit that we decided to organize this webinar. Politics always becomes a bigger talking point in the run-up to a general election. The controversies of the day can be highly absorbing, even entertaining. Whether they actually help clarify the decisions we have to make as voters, well, that's another story. In this webinar, we want to get back to basics and ask what exactly we should be focusing on when we assess candidates and parties. To help us, we have with us two political scientists, Walid Jumblat Abdullah and Chong Jia Yen. But I want to start with a guest who used to wear another hat as she had a seat in Parliament as a non-partisan nominated member of Parliament between 2018 and 2020. So Anthea Ong, welcome. And I'd like to kick off the discussion by asking you, what do you think core roles of MPs are that we might often overlook or perhaps don't understand fully that you would like to share with the audience?
Thanks very much, Sharon. Good evening, everyone. Delighted to be here. Rare for me to have such an exciting Sunday evening, I have to say. So to your question, I think I want to start by reflecting on something that's been on my mind recently. I mean, to your point, we're constantly bombarded with sound bites, and the news cycles seem to spin faster each day. It's so easy to get caught up. It feels a bit like we are watching a political drama unfolding, right? And I even actually made a little bit of a quip the other day about how I'm just binge watching these two NMPs resigning before their term finish as a plot twist, with PAP scoring their own goal that has now left voters thinking, oh, surely there's only now one way, for diverse voices in Parliament. So I think, yeah, coming back to this, right, what you said, it's so true. We're not just spectators. We're the ones who have the power to choose our leaders, and we have the responsibility to pick the people who will govern us for the next 5 years. And so I remember when I was first appointed as an NMP, and then in the induction, we were then clearly shared what's the functions of Parliament, what is the role of MPs. And even at that point, I thought, wow, I've never thought of it this way. So I thought I'll start off, with my sharing on just, as you said, going back to basics. What does Parliament do? What role do our MPs play? And most importantly, how do we keep score and assess them as candidates, right, as we get into our conversation? So Parliament has three functions, and therefore MPs, by default, by definition, also have three key functions. One is lawmaking. The second one is holding the government to account on its policies and actions. And the third is financial scrutiny, which we just went through in budget and committee of supply debates. So I guess it's important for me to just share a little bit, and then we can discuss. I don't want to do too much, because I think in the course of our conversations, the three roles will come up again and again. But I think in lawmaking, for me, it's actually really one of the most important duties of an MP. But it's not just about introducing bills, which most can't do anyway in Singapore Parliament, given the immensity of it all, unless you have the government on your side. And that was what I was advised by former NMP Walter Wood when I approached him in my initial months, audaciously thinking I was going to move a private member's bill on Mental Health Care and Treatment Act. So I think it means that MPs must show up for debates, even if they can't introduce new bills, and use this as opportunities to raise concerns that reflect the needs of their constituents. But given that Singapore's MPs are part-time, we really have to ask, how do we assess whether a candidate is truly prepared to engage meaningfully in the legislative process? And that's from my own experience. So I ended up really just sort of speaking up as much as I can with the bills that are tabled in Parliament, particularly during the second reading. The next, holding the government to account. With limited time, that's all of 90 minutes for question time at the beginning of each sitting. We do favor efficiency over depth in the Parliament. How do we then ensure that our MPs are capable of asking tough, probing questions, and also then pushing for the real answers, which is why supplementary questions become really important, where ministers are not going by scripted response. So we need to think about how do we want our candidates to demonstrate ability to ask these tough questions. And last but not least, I will end with financial scrutiny. Again, with a supermajority parliament, which means every budget table would be passed, scrutinizing the budget can be challenging. But we still should look at what is due process. And one thing that really stood out for me as an MP and NMP in my first year was how little time we actually spend on supplementary estimates, not just the estimates for the coming year, but also sort of reviewing the year that we just came. And I think that's also really an important aspect. And MPs have the opportunity to actually want to file for questions. So I'll leave it at that. I think it suffice to say this conversation is going to be interesting, but I thought bringing us back to the functions of Parliament and therefore what MPs have to do in their role as members of Parliament could help us sort of make sense of what we need to do in all of this very exciting and very entertaining time that we're in. Thank you. I look forward to a very thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you so much, Anthea. Ian, can I next turn to you and ask you to supplement what Anthea has just covered, and also perhaps to tell us a bit about MPs' constituency roles?
Yeah, sure. So in addition to what Anthea said, I do agree that the members of parliament, their primary role as legislators, as lawmakers, is to make law, which means to say that they should be scrutinizing bills, which are draft laws that come on the floor. They can propose amendments if they want. Of course, those will be subject to a vote. But like private members' bills, which every member actually technically has a right to raise, sometimes the point may not be to get the bill passed. Sometimes you may raise an amendment or a private member's bill in order to spur debate. So that's a possibility as well. Just because something's on the floor doesn't mean it will get passed. Now, I think the other thing that we should remember that MPs do in their legislative roles is that they are there to represent you, right? So they're there to represent your concerns. It's not just this sense of, okay, well, they represent different ethnic groups in Singapore as the GRC system holds, but the issues and interests that you may have, right? It's their role to raise it up. And one of the reasons why we have Parliament separate into majority parties and minority parties is supposedly that you have majority and minority interests being considered in the process of the passage of a law or in any motion. When you have NMPs, they're supposed to bring in additional considerations. In that sense, right, it's supposed to be representative government. So at least that's what we aspire to. And I think just one last bit on this is also if any individual or group of people have concerns, they can actually petition Parliament directly. This is not a mechanism that is used often in Singapore. Sometimes it is, but you can petition Parliament and have an MP raise your petition on the floor. And it often pertains to a bill, and it'll be debated. Doesn't mean it'll pass, but sometimes we do want that debate. We do want that discussion and deliberation to be done in public. Now, that's the legislative role. There's also the municipal role. In Singapore, our members of parliament well, they wear many hats, but at least in terms of their official roles, it's dual-hatted. Meaning to say that they are also in charge of town councils, they're in charge of municipal issues. In most other jurisdictions, your members of parliament are just lawmakers. They tend not to also have to worry about municipal issues. In Singapore's case, with the Town Council Act of 1988, the responsibilities for taking care of the municipal issues had gone to MPs. Before that, it was largely the responsibility of state agencies like the HDB. But even prior to that, prior to independence, there was a city council, basically elected city councillors who take care of municipal issues that came out from the municipal council that was fused into the Ministry of the Interior at that time, together with the rural board. So there was the elected council that looked after the urban area, and then there's the rural board that wasn't fully elected, that was looking after the rural areas. Those got fused into state functions in 1959, largely to streamline the function of government. So yeah, all this is really I know it get a bit dry, but it's just to show you the sense that the responsibilities of our MPs have morphed over time, and they actually take on a larger array of responsibilities than legislators in other jurisdictions. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Before we move to Walid, I just want to share, I'm not sure if you can see it, some of the questions that we have received from our audience. Isaac gets to exactly what Anthea and Ian have been talking about, this dual role, and he's wondering how this is balanced, and in fact suggests, well, maybe this should be delinked. Are they a happy marriage? Which of course is a question that goes far beyond what is relevant to this election, but it's a question that I guess is for the distant future. But I appreciate the fact that you are highlighting this dilemma. There's a balance to be struck between the two, and I think this is something that we want to talk about more. Another question that has come from Ashari Ali is, how can we evaluate the MP when they only appear at the door during election hustings? Well, personally, I don't know whether this is a fair comment. Of course, MPs may be doing a lot of work that is not immediately obvious to residents. But this raises a key question again that we are trying to address in this seminar. How do we evaluate candidates and sitting MPs? And so now I want to turn to Walid, and perhaps you could share with us what we know of voters' choices and preferences, through past election results. I mean, although voters, I guess, pick candidates for various reasons known only to themselves, but do you have a sense of what counts when voters are assessing both ruling party candidates and especially opposition candidates?
Thank you, Prof. So I am delighted to be here, and it's really related to what Prof. Yan Chong has already talked about. So when people are assessing, so we backtrack a bit. When people are voting, they are always voting based on the available institutions of that time. And in Singapore, this is not unique to Singapore. People vote according to the first past the post and GRC system. That's the first one. And people are also voting in the context of a dominant one-party system. Right? If the electoral system was different, if the electoral system was proportional representation, voters would behave differently. This is borne out throughout all we know in political science. Although, of course, Singaporeans it's a truism in international relations. All countries think they are unique. Singaporeans tend to think that we are unique, and therefore all these things do not apply to us, but they do. They do, and voters are rational. And I just want to show maybe some data. Sorry, I've been having trouble sharing the screen. Is it
Yes,
showing? Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So if you look, this is the average vote share that I've gotten based on the constituency numbers in the 2020 election. And you see the WP, well, in the total amount of votes it got in the constituencies it contested actually surpassed the PAP. But of course, it only contested in 6 constituencies out of 31. So the PSP got 40% and the SDP 38.3%. Now, if you had asked me before the elections, which are the 3 strongest parties, opposition, I would have mentioned these 3. So, and you look, the lower you go down, right, the weaker parties, quote unquote, the smaller their vote share. And what is the point here? The point here is voters in Singapore, just as voters elsewhere, are always discerning. They are always discerning. They do not just vote for the opposition for the sake of it. They do not just vote for any opposition figure. They will reward the ones that they think are more credible. Now, I think if we understand that, then there are a few things that we can get. One is we shouldn't insult voters. We shouldn't speak down to voters, and we shouldn't be thinking that, oh, probably, there could be a freak election because Singaporeans are not rational, whatever it is. I think Academia SG already did a super video on that, on freak elections. And secondly, I think maybe we will discuss this later also, we shouldn't infantilize voters. We shouldn't think that, oh, let me just do something like a TikTok video that is jumping on the current trend. Let me not discuss any policies. Let me not discuss any important thing and think that I can get votes. Or worse, there is a current issue now where every voter is talking about, but let me just pretend like no one is talking about it. Wait for it to die down, and then next week, hopefully there'll be a new news cycle. I think based on the totality of the data that we have of elections over many years, it shows that voters in Singapore, as voters elsewhere, are really discerning. So just to when there are 2 types, and you ask me what people are voting for. So people vote for party and for candidate, and this is true of plurality systems like ours. Both the party and the candidate matters. That's why you see that the stronger PAP candidates, they get higher voters than their seemingly weaker counterparts. Right? So they vote for the party and the candidate. And then for the opposition voters, there are 2 types of votes as well. One is they vote for the opposition, and the other is a vote against the PAP. And a vote against the PAP, we cannot dismiss it as nothing or as irrational, because it shows that it comes from a desire for something, right? Whether it comes from a desire for checks and balances, or whether it comes from a desire to show their disdain towards the ruling party, or whatever it is. The point is that I really want to hammer home, right, that whatever the results are, the voters, once they have decided, they have decided. If we accept the elections when the outcome is in our favor, then we cannot then reject the elections when the outcome is not in our favor. Either voters have always been rational and smart, or they have always not been. Right? So that's really the point that I wanted to make today.
Thanks so much, Walid. You mentioned that our voters are discerning. I think it's probably fair to say that they are also demanding, based on some of the comments and questions that we have received in advance from the audience. So Francis Pavri suggests MPs should quit from their day jobs and make this their day job, right? MPs should be a full-time job. A sentiment also raised by Kalpana: should full-time dedication to parliamentary duties be expected? And in fact, is this one of the benchmarks that we should demand, right? That if a candidate is willing to give up the job and become a full-time MP, that candidate deserves bonus points. I'm sure it's not a suggestion that it's a requirement, but is it a sign of dedication? In the same vein, Lo Wai Poon asks, perhaps a candidate should be required to volunteer, say 50 hours a year for 2 years before being qualified to contest in a constituency. This kind of reminds me of primary school admission. Volunteer the kids' school for priority. And I think the sentiment behind it is legitimate, right? I mean, if constituencies matter, I guess people don't quite like the idea of people parachuting in. You want candidates to have some familiarity and history with that constituency. I'm not going to ask you to respond to these. I think these are really just comments, things to think about. Let me go back, though, to the question of the MP's role in Parliament in particular. What is the importance of MP's role in the House? Ian and Walid, could you perhaps give us an example of PAP backbenchers or opposition MPs either contributing positively to policy or where you think alternatively that the chances for policy refinement were missed, to put it crudely, because MPs were not working hard enough? Who would like to go first? Ian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. I'll let my professor go.
So I want to go back to one thing that Anthea said, that in Parliament in Singapore we emphasize speed. I will say speed, not efficiency. They're not the same thing. We emphasize speed, right? How fast we pass laws. But what we don't have is a committee process. In many legislatures, there's a committee process to vet the bill before it even goes for a first reading. That allows for scrutiny. Some people claim that it slows things down. So that's, of course, something that is, again, for a longer conversation, but just to give a framing to what MPs could do in terms of the legislative process.
Can I just interrupt you? We do have select committees, but how is what you are describing different?
Sure. So select committees, okay, yeah, that's a really good thing to raise. So select committees in Singapore tend to be formed over some specific issue, right? Whether this was the hearing leading up to POFMA, whether this was the hearing relating to whether Pritam Singh did or did not lie in Parliament. So they tend to be formed around special issues. Whereas these standing committees in other legislatures, they tend to be committees with quite specialized. So they will focus on a particular area. So for instance, many legislatures might have a Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee. Sometimes they're separate, but sometimes they're together. And what they do is any legislation to do with defense or foreign affairs, they will look at it first. They will conduct hearings so that they would inform the bill and any sort of discussions afterwards, right? And they will call in expert witnesses and things like that. So that process is a bit different. And legislators over time, because they've served on a committee for a while, they keep looking at the same issue, can develop a degree of expertise. And sometimes these committees will have their own independent staff, so they are able to gather information and all that. So that's a.
You're saying that the current GPC system does not fulfill that, yeah?
Right. So the GPC system is slightly different. The GPC system is, as the name suggests, is the Government Parliamentary Committee. These committees, standing committees, are supposed to represent the proportion of Parliament, right, that I'm talking about. Whereas the Government Parliamentary Committees we talk about in Singapore, they only have members of the ruling party, right? Hence the term government, whichever the sitting administration is. They are supposed to provide feedback. They sometimes will get briefings, but what is missing in here is that representativeness that you get across the political parties that have been elected to Parliament. So the same level of elected voice or representation isn't there. So that's a key difference. And to my knowledge, GPCs, it's not practice for GPCs to vet every bill before it goes to the floor of Parliament. So that's another key difference. So, okay, on the parliamentary procedure stuff aside, I think if you want to talk about opportunities, I think where backbenchers made some change. I think when you look at some of the I think the efforts to repeal 377A, basically the original part of the penal code that penalized sodomy, right? So going after male homosexuality. I think a lot of backbenchers piped up from different sides, and I think they added to the conversation there. It was pretty important. I think in terms of amendments, we don't have that many, but one that came to mind was during FICA. This is the Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, where the Workers' Party did sort of come up with amendments saying that the CECs of all political parties should be, politically sensitive persons. They put a burden, including on themselves, that was not in the original bill, because I think their thinking from the debate was that, because of the risks of political interference, everybody who participates in politics on a professional level or semi-professional level should need that scrutiny to protect the nation. So I thought that was a useful contribution. In terms of a missed opportunity, I thought that this will go to, these are laws that I follow a little bit more. So I think I'll go back to POFMA, for instance. This is the Protection Against Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act. I thought that it could have included more on public education, media literacy, because a lot of POFMA relies on the executive branch to make decisions, whereas it's not so much inoculating the population. And I think that's pretty important. I think FICA also included missed opportunities. So, for instance, for the reporting of politically sensitive persons, yes, this will be onerous, but also when you consider protection of the nation, right, you have close family members being exempt. You have from the regulations on reporting for the PSP, politically sensitive persons, and also the reporting is not made public, right? So I think public scrutiny is one way to further protect, but basically that didn't come up, right, in the amendments by any side. So I thought that was a missed opportunity. So I don't want to go on forever, Paulette.
Just to jump in with a comment from Gary Cheng, who gathers from the discussion, therefore, shouldn't we be focusing more on depth than efficiency, which I think is a good way to summarize the challenge. Walid, did you want to?
Yes, I wanted to add other than because in the framing of your question also, you didn't mention, Prof, you didn't mention NMPs. That's another important source of.
We're not voting for NMPs this year, so.
Yeah, it's true. But NMPs, I think, somehow has
you might be voting for former NMPs.
Yeah, exactly. Tangentially entered the discussion, right? So people in Parliament like NMPs have introduced private members bill, right? Kalwanjit Soin, but the first one was Walter Woon. But really, other than looking at how tangibly, quote unquote, that each backbencher or a backbencher has affected policy, right? I think we also need to just zoom out and think that that's not how policies are immediately made or changed, right? Because Parliament ultimately is theatre. And the person who said this who told me this was Prof. Walter Teixeira, amongst many other people, of course. Parliament is theatre, and he only understood... Another former nominated member. And he understood this the most when he was in Parliament, because the purpose of an NMP or backbencher speaking in Parliament is not just speak to the policymaker, right? It's actually to generate buzz in society, right? And the more buzz, discussion you manage to evoke in society, and then in the long run, if you manage to eventually change that policy, it may be difficult to trace it back to that person. Like it's not immediately obvious, but I think you can. And that's how we should be thinking about the role of backbenchers. It's very easy to just dismiss a backbencher. Hey, how many laws did you change? Or how many policies did you manage to pass? I think it is more than that. So some of the currently, not NMPs, but if you look at backbenchers, PAP backbenchers, Zulkarnain Rahim, he has asked the most number of questions on Palestine, on Singapore's position on Palestine. All right. And credit to him. Of course, the Workers' Party also has asked a few questions on this, but this is a role that can be played by many people in Parliament. In fact, Anthea knows the history of the Hansard more than I do, especially when it comes to the NMPs. But I was going through the history of the GRCs, and I was shocked to see that, for me even, I was shocked to see that there was a lot of dissent in Parliament by PAP MPs, especially my MPs didn't like the idea of the GRCs. And I'm thinking, we don't really witness that kind of dissent anymore, right? At least not to that level, at least. So maybe the backbenchers also have not been. It could be a function of more opposition MPs being in parliament, and then backbenchers think that we have to fall in line publicly more, and all our dissent must be behind closed doors. But I think the country would be poorer if they think like that.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, before we continue, go back to the question I asked. Yeah, I mean, I do find that the PAP has, over the decades, always been torn between two alternative responses to Singapore's desire for more opposition, right? And they're kind of contradictory. One is that, okay, since Singaporeans want this, the PAP should reflect that diversity more. Yeah, but I think it's always, and I think they tried this the most during a brief period in the 1990s under Goh Chok Tong, which was when I think Tan Cheng Bock actually emerged as quite a vocal backbencher. But then I think it's always concerned that, look, if we actually generate such a debate within the PAP, are we actually creating appetite for more? Yeah. So this desire to reflect diversity through the PAP consistently is reined in and against this other impulse that maybe we should close ranks. Yeah. If we're being harangued by opposition and Kepo and MPs and so on, PAP MPs actually should close ranks, stand together, and so that there's less divergence among MPs. And I suspect that we are in that phase right now. Yeah, from your observation. But Anthony, I want to come back to you and ask you, because I know you've put in a lot of thought to this, about how can citizens actually track MPs' performance better? Most of us do not follow every single debate, do not keep count, do not even keep track of our own MPs, on a consistent basis. What should we do?
Yes, and to your point, every one of us sort of is guilty of that, right? And that means that when it comes to election campaigning, the recency effect of it all, especially since our campaigning period is so tight, that becomes all that we think about or know about the candidate that we are assessing. And I think that's really not gonna really help promote a healthy democracy. So I'm really happy to say that in recent years, we have some great citizen-led efforts to track MPs' performance to ensure greater transparency. The one great example, and I know it's been really hard for them to keep going, especially since they have graduated, is CAPE, the Community for Advocacy and Political Education. It's a student organization that was formerly a student organization based at Yale NUS. But since then, they're now independent and nonpartisan. Thank you for showing the good work that they do. So what they do is that the CAPE Parliament Tracker tracks MPs' contribution to national debates, their attendance, how often they speak in Parliament. They even do a great job in showing attendance, speeches, questions filed by party as well. And I think, I'm not saying that that's gonna tell us all, but it's a baseline, right? I mean, it's quantitative indicators, it's a start, it's a baseline that we can start in terms of investing in more of this sort of performance tracker of MPs. Another important initiative, full disclosure, I'm involved with them, is SG Mental Health Matters. And we have this initiative called Policy Watch. This group was formed for my budget 2020 debate, where we were getting really challenged with knowing the information in mental health care. And so we decided to do our own public consultation. So that actually then created this group that have come together to inform and educate the public on mental health policies, which, by the way, actually it's really broad, right? Which is why I was able to sort of speak up on just about every bill to bring in the mental health angle. So again, with SG Mental Health Matters, the Policy Watch is tracking MPs raising mental health issues on a monthly basis, and then at the end of the year, produce an annual sort of a research study report. going by even the constituencies, the MPs, but also going a bit deeper to try to start getting to more qualitative issues. So also looking into intersectional mental health, you know, instead of just sort of purely clinical mental health care related issues that are raised. So I hope we can see more. I know CNA and some other groups did do closer to election. They always kind of do a leaders board, as they call it, right? But that's also very quantitative, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful, you know, in telling us more. But it's a start in terms of just how many questions, how many bills. Kate's Parliament Tracker also allows us to see just which ministries get asked the most by the members of Parliament as well. So I'm really hoping that, you know, we all can support this efforts, and then, you know, and we can strengthen this effort, because this is very much needed. In countries like Malaysia and Canada, it actually started in Canada. It was a citizens' effort called the Open Promises, and citizens came together to start tracking every promise that ministers and MPs gave to the citizens, and then ask citizens to, every time you hear something, know something on the ground that relates to this promise, actually add on to that. And so, yeah, that's what I hope we can see more of, to keep track of, yeah, what's going on with our MPs.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing this. Some of it is obviously hard work, and it's quite inspiring that this work is being done by fellow citizens with very limited resources, I should add. Yeah, and hopefully there's a lot more of that provided by different organizations. I want to next ask about, you know, the way in which most of us nowadays are actually experiencing campaigning, which is, you know, on our devices. Yeah. I mean, door-to-door campaigning will, of course, intensify as election draws nearer. But a lot of outreach, even then and now, is via social media. A lot of this isn't really about the issues. We see candidates cooking and exercising, for example. I'm wondering, I mean, do the candidates know something that we don't? I mean, is this actually what voters want? Ian?
Sure. So I think the candidates do know something that perhaps we don't, which is, given short attention spans, given the desire for people to find relatability in people, often, you know, that is what gets attention. That seems to be, at least, I mean, not just in the Singapore case, but I think it weighs quite heavily in Singapore. Or how do I like this candidate as a person? Do I think that this is someone I like? Is this, and we hear this a lot, right? Whether they're a good quality candidate, whether they have some professional achievement or not. But I think what sometimes gets missed here is the question: is this person a good legislator? Right? Yes, you know, we also ask, are they, you know, given their constituency role, are they good municipal administrators as well? But, you know, are they a good legislator? Are they competent at their job? Will they scrutinize with, you know, due diligence the whatever comes across the floor of Parliament? That's something that we perhaps miss a little bit in Singapore, maybe because in general these are not issues we look at. But ultimately, I think, you know, being an MP is a job, you know, and a lot of us have experience interviewing for a job or interviewing people for a job. And yes, whether this person is a nice parent or, you know, has pets is one thing. It's nice to know, but ultimately, you know, we also do want to know, can they fulfill the job? Can they do their job well without fear or favor? That's something that sometimes gets missed a little bit in our context. And perhaps politicians like to play up the fact that people don't pay so much attention to that aspect of their responsibility.
Thanks, Ian. You mentioned job interviews. You know, Anthea, you've done interviews a lot in your line of work. Talk us through that. You know, what actually matters? I mean, we do have small talk in interviews. How much should this affect the decisions we make about whom to hire?
I think a reframe is really important. As much as we are choosing our candidates and our leaders that would actually shape the future of our country, we must not also forget that as voters, we are the employers of these MPs, right? If we start to shift our mindset that way and reframe it, then we would actually know the kind of questions that we want to ask them. Actually, including when they come to our door, but also when we meet them on the streets or in the hawker center while we're having our meals. And to Sharon's point, right? Thinking about job interviews, Ian is right. We're all done interviews, whether as being interviewed or interviewing others. We all know, yeah, of course, in the job interview, there's often a lot of small talk. Candidates may try to show off their personality, charm us with their hobbies, or try to make us feel comfortable. But this is what, do we think that this is what truly matters when we're making a decision, right, about them? So we need to focus on whether, they have the skills and qualifications to do the job. Do they understand, which is why it's so important. I think we go back to what is the function? What are the functions of, what's the functions of Parliament and what's the role of MPs, right? Do they understand these roles? So this should be our approach as voters. We're hiring our leaders to do a serious job. They're managing our country. They're making laws. They're holding the government to account in policies and actions, and ensuring that taxpayers' money, which is our money, is spent wisely. So I would for sure ask about their qualifications, not only about academic degrees, right? But I think their knowledge and experience to understand the issues we face as a country. And that should not stop only about at the domestic level. We really have to understand also what's going on in geopolitics and, in the national, international landscape. And do they understand, the processes of lawmaking and so on? And I think the other part of it, in terms of job interview, I would say that we need to assess their problem-solving skills, right? MPs are not just ceremonial figures. They're not supposed to just cut ribbons. They are actually decision makers. And so we need to make sure they can think critically, ask tough questions, and push for meaningful change. Last but not least, as with all job interviews, we need to evaluate their character, right? Will they put the needs of their constituents first, which is us, or will they be distracted by other priorities to the point of them not being full-time MPs? And can we trust them to act with integrity and accountability? I think if we all sort of, maybe this is a bit of a radical idea, if we all approach the election as we would a job interview, and we being the employers, we might be in a better position to choose candidates who are truly capable of leading and serving our country, right, for the next 5 years.
It's the question of character, and I think we want to spend a bit more time on that, a lot of time on that a bit later on. But before that, I want to come back to another expert interviewer, who is Walid. You don't do job interviews, you do teh tarik. I'm not sure whether you offer anything. I know you don't offer them any jobs, but do you offer anything at the end other than teh tarik? Probably not. But what's your experience been with interviewing politicians? What has it taught you about their preference for soft sound bites? And does this have any relevance to democracy's need for us to deliberate on issues, which I know is an issue you care deeply about as both a citizen and a political scientist?
Oh yeah, 100%. Thank you. That question really speaks to me. And I think one of the things that, before I answer that quite directly, one of the things that podcasts tend is they tend to humanize politicians. And I am not a fan of that. Not that I want to dehumanize that, not at all. I just want to really carry on what Anthea and Prof. Yan have already talked about, which is, I don't really care if you have pets, you are a good father, right? Because relevant, so I don't want your origin story as why you really wanted to join politics for two reasons why, right? Like, a lot of it is not relevant, some of it is, and second of all, you know how autobiography is seriously unreliable, because we tend to over romanticize our own past, and we rethink the events and reinterpret those events. But what has doing this for 110 episodes taught me, well, one, it's much easier to get opposition politicians on my pod than PAP politicians. Although I have gotten, so far in this election period, 3 PAP politicians, and by all accounts, actually, they have done pretty well. They've been DMing me, oh, I didn't know Rahayu was that eloquent and so on. And it's really a wonder why they don't not.
This is you're referring to the Minister of State that you
Yeah,
interviewed last
Minister
week.
of State, and and Zul, and so why don't they more of them come on, right? But I was thinking, well, maybe not everybody can do a 1 hour interview, right? Where it's more unscripted. So that's the first thing. And second thing, I have received before politicians who say they want to discuss this issue. And that's where I have to make a judgment call. And I have to think this issue, how important it is, how recent it is. So maybe if it's important, but it's not as recent, right? I could probably also think, okay, I can not ask this, or we cannot discuss it, right? But if this is an issue that everybody is talking about, and you want to come on and you don't want to discuss that, I've canceled episodes before because of that. I won't mention who, but before. What are we going to talk about? The weather or something? If you don't want to discuss something that voters are actually talking about. And it tells me something. If you are unable to stand your ground or explain your policy or explain your party stance or your personal stand on something that voters actually care about, I'll be worried for the state of democracy. As in, honestly, and sometimes I get disappointed uh, because I still have expectations. So sometimes I get disappointed in certain people when they tell me, "Oh, I don't want to discuss it." And I say, "Okay, fine, we don't come on." No, I'm not earning any money from this. It's not as if I really need this or anything. And I'm really doing this to really, it's for democratization. Um, but if having you on is just to give you a platform not to discuss difficult issues,
This is, I guess,
sorry.
sorry.
No,
Carry on.
I just wanted to say, as in, the preference is really for sound bites. The preference is for softball questions, I think, a lot of times. But that is also up to the interviewer to resist, to reject.
Right.
Now, I don't always manage to do it. I have to admit, I don't always manage to be able to call people to account as strongly as I can, right? Because also, there's a human element, all of that. But there are still red lines for me, right? If it's something important, like now, if you want to come on my show and you don't want to discuss Palestine, I'm sorry. I mean, we can discuss it for 2 minutes or what, right? But we cannot not discuss it. I still have to ask you what your party stand, what your stand is. If not, then don't come on, So there are certain issues that, for me, that we must discuss because voters care about it. Not just because I care about it, because voters care about it. Yeah.
I think I guess you could extend this not just to your own show, and not only to other influencers and podcasters, but I think even more importantly to the mainstream media, right?
Oh yeah, I think
I'm
so.
sure this sort of conditionality, I suspect, is quite common, that newsmakers, and it's not limited to Singapore politicians, celebrities do,
100%.
for example, I'm going to give you access, I'm going to agree to this interview, but these topics are off limits.
Exactly.
Bring back the analogy of a job interview. That would be the equivalent of a job candidate coming to the interview and saying, you can ask me about my pets, but don't ask me how to solve this problem. I mean, a job candidate like that would be shown the door immediately.
Exactly.
Right? And I think I would hope that journalists, number one, and secondarily, podcasters and so on, understand this for the reasons that Walid has said. You're not doing justice to the Singapore audience or the voter if you let job candidates for politics avoid the issues that, albeit controversial, that Singaporeans want to talk about. Right?
Exactly. So, bro, just one line, if I could, on this.
please.
Yeah. So that's the reason why I started with the slide. I started to show that Singaporean voters are not stupid. They are quite discerning. But if people like myself or even journalists, right, are not asking or not reporting on issues that people are already talking about, I think there is an assumption that we would be insulting the voter. Yeah, so that's.
Right. I want to stick with this question of relatability, and the term that you used was the need for politicians to humanize themselves. I think this is quite important. I think it's quite understandable that PAP candidates in particular feel the strong need to come across as relatable because the party, fairly or unfairly, labors under the reputation of being filled with technocratic elites, right? Their office holders are among the best paid in the world. They live in nice houses, while most politicians in all democracies want to be seen as of the people. PAP politicians, I think, for understandable reasons, are exceptionally keen to advertise their humble kampong backgrounds and so on, right? To show that they are not so different from ordinary Singaporeans. But I think this raises the, sort of perhaps what may sound like an abstract question that I'm going to pose to Anthea. How important is it for leaders to show that they are of the people, to convince people that they will be for the people?
Yeah. I think we all know relatability alone isn't enough. I think that's been established in this discussion so far. Yeah, it's understandable why we need to keep saying that we've come from humble backgrounds and we've lived in a certain kampong. I have to say that honestly, we all know that coming from a humble background doesn't mean that we stay humble. And so it's really not, it doesn't help us going back to that, right? So I feel like, this is a time maybe to, if you allow me to raise this question or this issue of trust, right? So because if we are looking for leaders who are serving us, who are serving the people, then trust is a big part of it. And trust is built on more than just a shared background, and this is going to be a little bit, it's actually based on a trust theory. And we do that a lot in the leadership, field. So it's called a trust theory or trust equation. And so what is it made up of? It's sincerity plus competence plus reliability divided by self-orientation, right? And so this whole, sincerity, straightforward, is about being genuine, that you care about the people you serve. It's not just putting on a persona for the campaign. Competence, we talked about it already a lot. In terms of the qualifications, the understanding, they're fit for purpose, they're right for the job. Reliability, of course, is for them to be dependent on, that they can be dependent on to follow through on their promises, especially and even in tough times. Now, self-orientation, this is critical, right? This is, again, what we shared earlier, that they must prioritize public interest over their own personal gain or political ambitions. So I feel like, therefore, when we talked about, what are we looking for in these leaders in terms of the qualities? We're really looking to be able to trust them. Of course, there are other leaders' qualities, and if I use the Work Well Leaders, model, which has also been researched, you will think about qualities like courage, compassion, commitment, and clarity. But I think what I'm essentially saying, I'm not trying to throw so many of this. It's not just about electing someone who seems of the people. It's about electing someone who has the trust, the values, the leadership qualities to govern effectively. So these are the qualities that will determine whether the leader is truly for the people.
Right. The term trust is, of course, one of the ruling party's favorite terms, but it tends to use it more in reference to integrity, right? Sort of financial probity and so on, incorruptibility and so on. But I take it you're referring to something different, that you've not used the term empathy, but that probably needs to be figured somewhere too, right? That I trust you. I know that you are not like me. You are much better educated than me. You are more qualified than me, and so on. But I'm going to trust you to be able to step into my shoes and represent me. Would that be a fair summation of what?
Yes, that's kind of covered in sincerity, right? Also, and the other qualities like compassion would come in, and I think commitment as well. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think trust is just about integrity. And in fact, as you just heard, even the well-researched trust theory does not have integrity in there that is being singled out, right? It's more reliability than just sort of focusing on integrity. Yeah, it's not to say integrity is not important. I don't think it's the be all and end all when we talk about the trust that we have on our leaders.
Ian, can I turn to you? Because I mean, I'm often surprised at how much stock is given to this notion of you're relatable, you come from a humble background, and you have to show that you know how to play working class sports and so on to get my respect. But and it's odd because the most popular politician of the last decade, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, always sounded patrician, right? Never tried to appear like he's just a kampong boy or whatever. Although he does, plays football, that helps, right? Why is it so difficult for the ruling party in particular to understand that relatability is not really the evidence shows that it's not a guaranteed vote winner. That Singaporeans are actually more sophisticated than that, right?
Yeah, so I mean, there's one thing I also want to sort of bring up here, right, which is people are not single issue voters. Sometimes the media tends to play it up that way. People look at many different things. So this is where when you look at someone comes in, clearly, someone who is very erudite, someone who is very used to talking about and working with more sort of abstract kinds of things. But I think what he effectively does is to show people that he genuinely cares, that he's in the way that he sort of talks about issues and the way that he engages people. He shows that he is actually interested in what people have to say. Whereas I think some of the relatability issues that come up is that you have people who will talk about their backgrounds and all that, but sometimes they don't give individuals or the public when they're in a more public setting a sense that they care or are interested in what the public or their voters have to say. And so just to show that you have a similar background perhaps is not enough. I also think that with in the case of PAPMPs, there's a certain they have a certain structural issue which is stacked against them. The PAP will run a slate of 97 MPs and there are many people who are office holders who everybody will know. There's face recognition. So if you are a newcomer or if you have been a backbencher, how do you then try to brand yourself, so to speak, such that your voters will remember who you are from this huge, almost 100-person slate? So that's where I think some of the relatability comes up, because they are trying to show that, I'm from this constituency, I have similar interests as you. So it's part of that too, that sort of desire or attempt to stand out against a huge slate where, there are other people who get a lot of the limelight already.
Right. So there's kind of a class, for want of a better word, a class divide or socioeconomic divide that candidates need to bridge, because of course most candidates are at least upper middle class, yeah. But there's also a generational divide, right? And here I want to ask Walid, we know that in recent election cycles, the PAP has been very anxious to appeal to the young and the other opposition parties as well. But for the PAP, I guess the bonds that it forged with Singaporeans during the nation-building years are now literally history, right? And so a lot of its campaigning style now seems to be designed to connect with this new generation of Singaporeans. What do you think are the tactics that work and what doesn't?
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to pick up on that point. So you mentioned that trust is no longer as solid, and it is true. So even if you look at all the data, right, the data that we have, trust in PAP and institutions in Singapore is still pretty high, but I would say it's much softer than before, right? The level of loyalty that my parents had for the PAP for Lee Kuan Yew. Like my generation and people even younger than me do not have, even when they trust the PAP and they like the PAP. So that means that a few events could change the votes, right? Because we are talking about the elections, when trust is much softer. So some of the things that I think work, and okay, so we don't know for sure, we'll find out after the elections, right? But I do think that online, on social media, and I'm on social media a lot. I'm not on TikTok as much as, well, I'm on TikTok more than I ever need to be. But still not as much as younger people. But there's really a fine line between cringe and educational. And I think actually our PM does it pretty well, just looking at reactions to it. I would say Minister Ong Ye Kung probably does it quite well as well. But there are some others. So this is not a party thing. This is really individual thing. And going back to what Provian said, people feeling they need to differentiate themselves. Some of them is really cringe and really awful, to the point that for some of them, the candidates where all they have are TikTok videos which are supposed to go viral, right? And I honestly, genuinely mean this, right? Whoever they are, whichever party they are from, if that's the only content they produce, for the sake of democracy, I hope they lose in the elections. And I said it quite seriously because I don't want that to be the standard we set for voters, right? And if they win, that means it works. It works with young people. That's all they ever need to do, without discussing any substantive policy, always avoiding difficult topics. So I really hope that doesn't happen. Now, the other thing, I think a lesson from 2020, right? It's maybe not so related to what you said, but maybe a bit in terms of authenticity and all of that, which is in 2020, I thought it was the first time that actually voters, especially younger voters, punished the PAP for what they perceive to be actions or injustice. I think that was the first time in 2020, to the point that Minister Shanmugam said that the PAP needs to do some soul searching because younger people think differently about race and religion. I think the high-handed actions that took place during the campaigning, that was something that younger voters especially rejected. So those are the kinds of things that I think would not work. If people are perceived to be condescending, especially because for the opposition, they have an unfair advantage in the sense that they are seen as the underdog. Right? So in one sense, I'm not saying overall they have unfair advantages. I'm just saying in that particular sense. So if the incumbent are perceived to be unfair and unjust or act in high-handed ways, that is something that younger voters would reject. So that is a sort of thing that would not work.
Let me just, on your point about perceived unfairness in the way the PAP treats its critics and the opposition and so on, let me just share one point of view or question that has come from Dilip Nair. What do the panel members feel needs to be done to convince both the PAP and the electorate that a loyal opposition is not a threat to Singapore's success, but a safeguard against complacency? So this really has to do with trust in critics and the opposition. Let me answer this, right? I think I actually don't think that the PAP would contradict this claim. I mean, I think the PAP is already convinced that a loyal opposition is not a threat. The disagreement has to do with how to define loyal, right? Because it tends to, it seems to assume that any sharp criticism or criticism that is uncomfortable with is a sign of disloyalty. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, Walid, because I think it does resonate with what some of the our audience members are sensing as well. But okay, so far we've been talking a lot about the individual candidates, right? But of course, candidates are part of collectives They belong to parties, and they will make up Singapore's 15th parliament. So when we think of parties and parliament as institutions, then the question of diversity comes up. We may have an image of a perfect MP, but cloning that perfect MP to fill parliament with 97 identical copies of that individual would paradoxically create quite a suboptimal, imperfect, and probably quite disastrous parliament, right? We do need diversity among, within parties as well as within the House. How do you think Singapore's 14th Parliament has rated, both in terms of multicultural as well as gender diversity? Ian, Walid, do you want to share your views on that?
I
Ian?
think, wait.
Okay, on Ian, we've not heard from you for a while.
I was hoping to hide. Um, so I think in terms of the 14th Parliament, because of the GRC system, we have quite a lot of representation across ethnic groups. I would argue that perhaps in terms of gender representation, we can do better. But
Gender.
of course, right, gender. But of course, it's not just Singapore's diversity and pluralism is not just a question of gender and ethnicity. Like I said, we are, as voters and as individuals, we're motivated by many different kinds of things. So we are also quite diverse in terms of issues we care about, and in that sense, I suppose where we see diversity is, especially with 3 different political parties in parliament now, there are at least consistently 3 different positions, and I suppose what we get then are 3 different approaches, right, to similar questions that are posed either through a motion or through a bill. And I think that's okay. Getting back to your earlier question about loyalty, disloyalty, sometimes in Singapore, not just in Singapore, but sometimes there's a tendency to think about disagreement as disloyalty, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And I think people can reasonably disagree and disagree sincerely. And I think we have seen some of that in the 14th Parliament. I think also sometimes in Singapore, we also like to be suspicious of people's motivations without really having much evidence. It's just because they have a different position. But that having been said, there is, I think, some range of views, some range of different approaches on how to tackle issues. But I think there is, because Parliament is majoritarian and political parties are essentially coalitions of people with different interests, collections of people with different interests. So there tends to be a focus on the kinds of issues that matter to most people most of the time, which is important for representative democracy. But what that means is that minority positions sometimes get neglected. And what we can end up is a form of tyranny of the majority. So what most people care about most of the time gets mentioned. But there may be things that's important for minority positions. Or minorities are not represented, through ethnicity and all that, and they sometimes might fall through the cracks. So I think that's where we see a little bit of in the 14th Parliament, especially since our political parties tend to be quite strict on party discipline.
Before we move on, let me just share a couple. I'm anxious to get some of the very thoughtful views from the audience, out there. On the question of minority representation, a couple of views on that perennial topic of whether we actually still need GRCs. Yeah, so Amos Sim asks whether Singaporeans are in fact sufficiently aware of our history and are politically mature enough to vote responsibly, and therefore quite naturally then choose enough ethnic minority candidates without the need for GRCs. So this, of course, is a question directly really to the Chinese majority, right? Are you mature enough to pick occasionally the enough Malay and Indian candidates and other candidates and so on? Another one comes from ethnic minority representation. Substantive ethnic minority representation. which I guess refers to how effective our minority MPs are in representing the views of their ethnic constituencies. I'm going to just leave these out there as things to think about. But so Ian, you've raised a couple of very important points. There are different ways to think about diversity, right? There's the traditional way, ethnic, but there's also sort of an ideational diversity of content or viewpoints that are expressed in Parliament. Walid, do you want to chip in on that?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. And I think our Parliament actually does quite well on ethnic representation because it's inbuilt, right, with the GRCs. I think for gender representation is about 30%, which is okay. It's not super, but it's not bad. It's not too bad. I'm really not too worried about that kind of diversity, even though I think there is value to it. But I'm more interested in ideological and intellectual diversity, where I think that's where we lack. And it's not just a function of the dominant one-party system. It is, but also I feel that sometimes within the party, they are not allowed to be too different. Going back to an earlier point I made, and just to answer your question, Prof, directly, and Arun's question, I personally wouldn't be too upset if all of Parliament was Chinese males. I wouldn't be too.
Walid, you're frozen.
For instance,
your idea was so radical that your screen froze for a while.
Yeah. Is it?
Your
Okay,
camera
sorry.
your camera fell. What? Walid is saying that he
Sorry.
wants the Parliament of 97.
No, I didn't say I want that. I say I'm not worried if that were to happen, and if they were intellectually different, right? And I'll give a very substantive example. In the 1990s, there was once a PMP who said in Parliament, I went to Little India and it was very dark. And it was, I mean, sorry. And then he went on further and said, not because there were no lights, but because there were too many Indians. None of the minority MPs actually stood up. And it was Cham Si Tong who stood up, right? It was a Chinese man who stood up and said that. Now, I would rather that kind of representation, right? Who actually will be speaking up for this as well. So I understand when you have ethnic minority MPs and women minorities, the assumption is that they would understand the community's issues more. And I think it's a fair assumption. However, there are a couple of caveats. First of all, there's a class dimension and they may be still isolated from what a lot of people are thinking. Secondly, is the community is not monolithic. Whether it's Malays, Indians, or women, they are not monolithic. And third of all, just because they understand doesn't mean they represent.
Right. And you raised, Ian, the point, a similar point, which I think you mentioned, of course, the importance of remembering that there's a party whip, right, to maintain discipline within the party, and it's up to the party how much to enforce it, in each debate. But it strikes me that in addition to this institution of the whip, it's as if many in the Singapore establishment, I would even count, frankly, many opposition MPs and many NMPs as well, have a psychological whip in their mind as well. And the latitude in our debates actually seems to have shrunk, and it's not very, everyone after a while sounds alike, and they're very apologetic if they don't sound alike. They feel that you have to stay in the middle. Was that your experience, Anthea? Because of course the NMPs are supposed to help us think out of the box. They're supposed to address exactly the flaw in representative democracy that Ian brought up, right? Which is a majoritarian tendency. NMPs, because they don't have to worry about their vote, are in fact free to take up important but not popular causes.
Yeah. And I would also even go as far as to say controversial, right, and difficult issues that would typically cause, even oppositions politically. So they may not raise. And my own personal experience during my term was that migrant workers' issues were not raised by the opposition at all. And therefore there's such a role that the NMP can step up to play. And so going back to why I have personally been advocating for us to strengthen the NMP system, right? I mean, I understand all of the challenges of whether they are is actually democratic or not. But if we continue to stay as a majoritarian democracy, then minority interests become a really high price pay for oppositions trying to get into parliament, understandably. But also, I'm also looking at just the sort of partisan ills that we're seeing in mature democracies around the world and how divisive and polarizing that can be. If we already have a nonpartisan bloc institutionalized into our parliamentary system, why would we not want to learn from what we are already seeing happening before us and do something about, this bloc, right? This nonpartisan bloc that provides that diversity to Walid's point, there should be diversity in ideology and intellectual, inputs as well, right? Intellectual discourse, but also because it has been designed with the functional sectors in mind, they also bring that diversity of expertise and experience. Never mind that because they don't need the votes, they don't have to be, they can speak up without fear or favor. They can also bring really interesting, maybe even specialized, expertise. And I think that diversity of approaches to solving some of this complex and challenging problems that we're facing as a country is really important. It's not just about debating for debating's sake, but it also really offering solutions to some of these challenges. And because if it's a block and the fish cannot see water, meaning that, if PAP or even in the opposition party, they behave as a block, as a party, they can't see outside of that, that transparency, then we need to get more of a way to get the fish to see water, right? So one example I would say is this, all of us know the ban on lorries for migrant workers, right? That's been an issue that Parliament has debated for more than 10 years. And it was actually raised by Halimah Yacob when she was just an MP before she became a speaker, and then she became a president, and she's now stepped down. So you can imagine how long it has been. I mean, is it really a challenging issue? Well, no, that's no problem without a solution, but that's a real issue, right? Because we continue to see this issue as either or. Either we ban it and then, the businesses would have to struggle, so the economic considerations took over, or we do that and then, the workers would be safe. But actually, I would argue that it's both and. Why can't we ban lorries and still look at how we can actually support businesses, right? And what needs to happen? So some of us are finally coming together and say, okay, let's come together and propose a solution, and actually bring along, instead of actually the businesses against the workers, is actually to say, let's bring the businesses along with us to find a solution. And say maybe we can use the foreign worker levy as a way of helping the businesses tide over the additional cost. And then there will be someone like Jack Sim that came out and said, no, actually there's also other solutions. Let's go to the Transport Association and find an innovator to design a bus that can also carry equipment at the back of the bus. But, there'll be seats in front of the bus. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are talking about ideology, we're talking about intellectual discourse, but we must also talk about people with ability to come up with, solutions, innovative solutions for the country.
And I think, and even before that, of course, you're talking about the need for people to understand that this is a moral issue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
It is not something that can be just summed up in, in a spreadsheet of costs and benefits and so on.
And also, actually, it's really a challenge when we actually have chosen the economic consideration and challenge over the moral consideration. And I think I'm not going back to NMP, but I also think that, you know, this sort of partisan-based type of debate is where NMP can actually, you know, really contribute. In fact, it was Shamgam as a member of parliament during the debate for the NMP scheme that says that, you know, an opposition raising an issue or an idea that's in opposition to PAP can be explained away easily on partisan agenda, but not an NMP.
Can I come in on this really quickly?
Okay, sure.
So I think while not taking away from Anthea's point, there is also the question of how NMPs are selected. So there's the Special Select Committee that recommends NMPs to the President for appointment. But that Special Select Committee is made up of representatives from the elected MPs in Parliament, proportionally, of course. So that means that there is, at the background, a natural tendency, I think, to sort of select NMPs that might reflect some of those views. So that might put a dampener on who you get in Parliament as NMPs. Plus, NMPs, the idea is that they come from, you know, they represent sort of different sectors, so to speak, right? Arts and so on. Now, part of the issue there also is, you know, these people are not directly elected. There was an effort, right, to have an arts NMP elected, but generally they're not elected. And there's a question of whether they would over-represent the positions of their their sector. Now, this is not a, you know, abstract in principle issues. Sharon, you should be quite familiar with this, because the former criticism of the functional constituency system in Hong Kong was that these functional constituencies, there are far more of them, of course, but these functional constituencies worried far more about their sectors than the sort of overall lawmaking issue. So there's some tension there that needs to be also worked out, even with NMPs.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I agree with that, which is why I think I don't want to take this away, because it's not about NMPs, but it's strengthening the system, right? We need to look at how to get over some of this, but absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah. Let's move on from NMPs, but take the larger point that you know, it is important for our elected MPs to see beyond popularity, right? Rather than be reactive or simply respond to public opinion as it stands, to perhaps shape public opinion. They can be thought leaders. They can have their own convictions, and this leads me to a point raised by Chuck, a social worker. Let's see, where is it? Am I sharing the right thing? Hold on. Here we are. Yeah. This could be a relevant question we ask of candidates as well. Do you believe strongly in something? What is your pet cause, right? She mentions Lee Bihua and Louis Ng, and I think that it's relevant to the discussion that we're having. I mean, it would be nice if there are MPs who, regardless of the popularity of their causes, are willing to take a stand, and I think I'll put that out there. And that kind of leads me to one of the final issues that we want to discuss, which is that of character. Yeah. It's not really spelled out in the Constitution, but I'm sure we'll agree that it's extremely important. It is the MP's role as a leader, right? Whether or not one is an office holder or just a backbencher, an opposition MP, MPs do have this enormous role in setting the right tone for politics and public life, and I guess for social relations in general. I remember Lee Hsien Loong saying, more than 10 years ago, that politicians have a duty to get the politics right, by which he meant acting with integrity, cultivating trust, and so on, right? And I'd like to quote what our colleague Teo Yu-Yen messaged us a couple of days ago. To her, getting the politics right should mean, I quote, ethical orientations towards fair play, due process, respect for diverse viewpoints, the greater good, and so on, right? Which are all necessary to the work of building a democratic polity, unquote. So she emphasizes that these are not so much personality traits like how relatable or likable an MP is. These are, I quote, actual abilities and commitments to playing their part in a democratic process of making decisions that fairly speak to the diverse interests of Singapore society. So Anthea, is this a reasonable expectation that voters should have of their elected representatives?
Absolutely. I think this is not just reasonable, but critical expectation that voters should have. The role of an MP is really not just a political position. It's a leadership role, and leadership is a privilege, not an entitlement, right? When voters elect someone to serve, they're entrusting that person with a responsibility to act in the best interest of the public with, with integrity and fairness. So I do think that MPs must hold themselves to the highest ethical standards, because their actions reflect not only their personal values, but also the values of the society they represent, in this case, Singapore. I also want to say that the worst behaviors we tolerate from our leaders eventually become the standards we accept as a society, right? So I do think this is a very important aspect. Having said that, I must say that, it's also important to recognize that our leaders are human. They're not infallible. They will make mistakes. Then the key questions and how we judge them on that is how they, ethically handle those mistakes. Do they take responsibility for them? Do they demonstrate the sincerity and integrity to learn, to apologize, to correct course, right, when needed? So I think when we talk about ethical standards and considerations like what Yu Yan has raised, it's also about accountability, which is such an essential part of this. So yeah, so we must remember that we are not looking at just MPs' policies or proposals, but also looking at their ethical conduct, whether they're in line.
And I want to extend that, because it's not just about their own conduct and their private life, right? Because I often sense that what Singaporeans crave is a kind of moral leadership.
Yeah.
In the sense that, and we sometimes see this. So I'll give you an example, which would be that, say some preacher says something that is completely offensive to another faith. Yeah. And it just makes people really upset, and you crave someone with status, someone with a moral leader who will come out and express for Singaporeans that this is beyond the pale, right? You need someone to come out there and say that what this person said is completely wrong. It's not us. These words do not represent the best of Singapore. And you want those words to come out quickly, and to set the tone, to do this kind of repair work, in a society that has so much going on. Yeah. And I often feel that there's that when leaders, not necessarily politicians, it could be religious leaders, it could be public intellectuals and so on, when they do that, it's deeply appreciated, because Singaporeans want, they know right from wrong. Yeah. And when there is there's stuff said that crosses a line, they want someone to come out and say better than they can why this is wrong, why this is acceptable. It needn't amount to a police report, or nobody needs to go to jail, right? But you need to set the standards.
Yes.
Right?
This is what I mean, right? By how we shouldn't tolerate the worst behaviors.
Right. And the worst kinds of words and so on, right? This kind of assault on morality and ethics is a regular feature in our sort of social media jungle. Yeah. And it's bound to increase as the elections draw nearer. So I want to hear from Ian and Walid, how are politicians as a class doing so far in terms of serving as, moral leaders, maybe too strong a term, but providing that kind of moral leadership. You don't even need everyone to do it. You just need, for each controversy, someone to come out quickly. You mentioned Halimah Yacob earlier. I think she's a good example of someone who has, on occasion, done that in a very timely way, come out and just, planted a flag for ethics, right? And people really appreciate that. But in recent controversies, I don't sense that. I don't see that happening.
And that's such a, before I let Walid and Ian speak, right? I mean, actually courage, that moral leadership is such a big part of leadership. because you are actually, responsible for, a collective of human beings who are actually, following you. So that courage, in moral leadership.
Moral courage, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So if we have to look at this particular election campaign, like it hasn't officially started, but it has. And you would see that there's a mixed bag so far, right? So on one hand, I see one of the positive developments I see, right? When opposition and PAP candidates meet, walkabouts, and they take pictures together. Now, it may seem trivial. I think that's something positive. I think that's something to be celebrated, to show that we are political opponents, we are not citizen adversaries, because all of us want the same thing. We have different ideas to get there. The more the better it is, because we do not want that kind of, high-hand tactics against the opposition, like as personal attacks. Those, I think we should be beyond that. And Antia's line just now was just superb, and I think it encapsulates everything. Now, one of the things that a lot of people would say in counter to our expectations, there's liberal academic expectations, right? They would say that, politics is a contact sport. Politics is a contact sport. Contact sport, people get hurt and so on. But in contact sports, there are still rules, and there's still a referee, and there are also norms, not just rules, the official rules, right? For instance, it's not illegal, right, if you're playing football, to pretend like you're injured, right, and then waste time. But the spectators do not like that, right? The spectators do not like that. And in these elections, there
is gentlemanly conduct on the field
exactly
as well.
that's that point, right? That's the point, that you don't need the official rules to do it, even if you're not breaking the rules. And in contact sports, there is a referee. So in this case, the ultimate referee is the voters. So this is where I really want to say that I think in 2020 that voters showed that they do not tolerate these kinds of things. And I hope the lesson is learned from all parties. And if parties violate, whichever party it is, and some of my, well, at least one of my recent teh tarik ones, it was quite contentious. And it went on for very long. This is not from the ruling party, from the opposition party. So I hope whichever opposition ruling party shows that they are violating certain norms, they are scapegoating certain groups, I think ultimately the voters should be the referee and say we reject this, right? And if you want to be very specific, just now I praised, I saw Harun and Dr. Harun and Ravi from Red Dot United, seeing each other, and they were hugging each other. I saw Paul Tamaya and somebody else from the PAP taking pictures. So those are the positive examples. We also have negative examples. We have our two office holders liking a post and liking it without any explanation. I would still like to see an explanation for that. Just explain whatever it is, just explain, and then we can see. Or at least one of them did try to explain, but I would like to see proper explanations. I think those are the sorts of, because that post, it doesn't come from a politician, right? But that post is not the kind of post that politicians should be liking. I don't care about social media influencers, right? But politicians, when you like and endorse those kinds of posts, it says something, right? So those are the things that I hope we stay away from, and I hope voters really pay attention to this, because voters did pay attention to this in 2020. I hope we see more of that.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, you're saying that the voters should and will have the final say. But the problem with many, like the incident that you mentioned, is a lot of damage is done in the meantime, right? So one of my fears about elections, is regrettable, maybe unavoidable, is that they are inherently polarizing, of course. Yeah. So perhaps if we didn't have elections, might have politicians doing things according to conscience. This is right, I'm going to support it. This is wrong, I'm going to call it out. Almost by definition, a polarizing context is one where they say, he's saying it, he's on my side, so I'm not going to call it out. That person is saying it, he's right, but since they're not on my side, I'm going to withhold my praise. And unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So
and
the case you mentioned seems to be like a classic case of
yes,
where it demanded to be called out, let
right.
alone
So
not liked. It demanded to be called out, but it wasn't.
and I hope I also can and I'm in a position to call this out, because I have also called out people on my side when I feel that they have violated certain norms. So I hope that if those of us, we do it, right, people on our side or our logical side, right, then other people should do it as well. So hopefully, because this shouldn't be a race to the bottom, right? That what you are describing, Prof, is just a race to the bottom. Oh, my side, I'm not going to do it. And then another person say, yeah, my side does worse, I'm not going to do it, right? And then we are left with no norms. Now, oh, what's the point of decorum and so on, right? But there is a point to it. The point is we don't want society to worsen in terms of polarization. We don't want rudeness, disrespect to be the norm, right? There is value in that, however airy-fairy that may be.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, elected representatives have a much greater responsibility to
100%.
set those norms, right?
100%.
To maintain those norms.
Much more than activists, right? Like, so if you're going to call out activists for violating those norms, and I'm happy to do that, a higher standard should be held for elected representatives, government or opposition.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to unfortunately have to. We've taken much longer, because there's so much meat in so much of what you said. So a quick final round, which I guess is I'm going to ask you for a wish list, but a list of one, one item each. What's top of your wish list for GE 2025? Not in terms of the result, right, but in terms of the campaign. In terms of its tone, what people should be focused on. What's your wish list for voter conduct or candidate conduct? Can we start with you, Ian?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that I've already said, but I just want to finish off on the point that we made earlier, which is I think it's important whether we're looking at the election context or any other debate, that there is life after that debate, there's life after the vote. So we have to ask ourselves, as we're in the heat of the moment, what kind of society do we want? Because that sort of willingness to go after each other, willingness to question motivations without evidence, that willingness to let ourselves off easy, let people we like off easy, that is what paves the way for greater polarization. Many politicians have complained and warned against that. And I suppose a lot of this will start at home in terms of their own behavior as well. So that's, I think, quite key. Of course, conviction is important. You can do it. You can do it sort of in a hard sort of institutional way. You have term limits, but that will create problems for recruitment. However, that having been said, I think conviction is important, but that conviction, people need to understand that people have different, others have to consider that people have convictions because their convictions are different from yours, doesn't mean they're necessarily coming out from a place of malice. And the sort of greater good of our society as a whole, whatever your party stripe, should be something people remember.
Thanks so much. Very well put. Anthea?
So for me, I was trying to think about the top of my wish list. And it's really hard. It's a whole list of them. I think I'll just really go through quickly. I think the first and foremost for me would be to just be about substance, not style, right? I mean, there's just so many slogans and catchy slogans. And I just want to see that we are focusing as voters on policies, on all that we talked about when we are choosing the candidate, right? And I also think that in the face of what's going on with the leadership crisis across the world, I can't emphasize enough, and thanks to Yu Yan for raising this to remind us that we choose leaders who are as ethical as they are competent, right? If not more. And going with Yen's point, I really hope that we don't have this excitement only once every 5 years, but democracy doesn't stop at the ballot box, that we create a political system that keeps citizens engaged all year round, and that it thrives on debate, that we can create a more open political space where all voices can be heard. And that's why, to me, it's like a podcast election of sorts, with the public town squares being expanded. But But the caveat is Walid's point earlier. Let's not make this about their personal interest, but
Right.
grill them for what they stand for. Yeah.
There's a great point raised earlier, Anthea, that I think echoes that touches on what many of the audience members have contributed. Which is, they're raising issues that actually are not election issues per se. These are systems questions that need to be asked long before the elections. Right? Finally, Walid.
Yeah, so one wish list for about the politicians, one about the voters. So for the politicians, more debates, less defamation suits, or zero defamation suits, or threats of defamation suits. So that's one. So I really hope, and I'm not saying it in a whimsical manner. I hope that is the where our society heads, right? Heads, HEADS. So if we disagree with somebody, we debate them in public, right? So that's what I would like to see. For voters, I hope voters pay attention. I think going back to what Prof. Yan and Anthea said from the start of this webinar, voters pay attention to people's parliamentary performance as much as they do to municipal issues. A lot of times when I'm speaking to people, I ask them, how's their MP? They will say, oh, very good. Or you.
Oops. Walid is frozen again. Another moment.
Sorry again. Yeah, so just if I could just repeat that time, a lot of times where I see people and I ask them, how's your MP? They would say that my MP is good or bad based on municipal issues rather than based on parliamentary performance. So I hope we can pay as much attention to that. Member of Parliament.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Walid. I'm going to end with actually sharing a very philosophical question from Balbinder Kaur. Is voting a right or a privilege? What is the difference between right and privilege in the context of elections? I guess I'm going to answer that very briefly by saying that legally, constitutionally, voting is, of course, a right of all Singaporean adults. But we know, including Hong Kong, where I am, where we don't have that right to vote for our top leaders or for all Hong Kongers to stand as leaders, right? So perhaps the right way to put it would be that for Singaporeans, it is a right, and having that right is a privilege. And I hope Singaporeans will bear that in mind, not take it for granted, and make full use of it, play our role as citizens. So thank you so much on behalf of AcademiaSG for joining us. Thank you, Anthea Ong, Walid Abdullah, and Chong Jia Yan, and for the audience. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.